Good morning, everyone. My name is Haley Shanoff, and I'm one of the communications advisors here at the college. Thank you for joining us for this year's keynote address, presented by Professor Charmaine Williams. Before I introduce Professor Williams, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items. This session has live captions. To turn on the captions, click the Show Captions button below the video player. You can choose to see the live captions in either English or French. If you need tech support, please use the support chat at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Click on the icon and you'll be connected with our live support team. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the keynote. You can submit your questions through the chat feature on the right-hand side of this session's page. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Charmaine C. Williams, Dean at the Factor in Wintash Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto. Professor Williams has taught at U of T since 2002. Her research and practice focus on access and equity issues affecting marginalized populations, including racial minority women, LGBTQ individuals, and those impacted by serious mental illness. With a clinical background in mental health care, Professor Williams has led organizational change initiatives in the healthcare sector and is recognized for her expertise in anti-racism, cultural competence, and mental health education. She has contributed to national and municipal policy as a member of the Mental Health of Black Canadians Initiative expert panel and the Toronto Police Service's Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. Professor Williams is committed to advancing truth and reconciliation, social justice, equity, and inclusion through research, education, and community engagement. Please join me in welcoming Charmaine Williams.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Haley, and it's a real pleasure to be here. My thanks to people who apparently put my name on a list. I've actually been invited to do the talk at this day before, but in the past I could never come because I used to always go down to Tobago to teach in the Caribbean Institute for Alcoholism and Drugs every year. And I think the weather of the past week has really reminded me of why I really was always glad to be going to Tobago at this time of year. But the stars have lined up, so I'm available to do it this time. And like I said, an absolute pleasure. So I'm going to start by just asking, how are you? How are you doing? And it's one of those questions that we ask each other. And I feel like we used to always just answer with fine. It was very Canadian to say, no, fine, everything's fine, right? But I feel like that changed a bit in the last years, that we started being a little more, transparent about how we were doing because we all knew we were going through something, right? And I know for me, my answer to how are you doing has often been, oh, well, way better than last year. Okay, because last year was a really, really tough year. But then even before that, remember the pandemic? Even before that, there was a period of time when I was also saying, oh, well, better than last year. And I really think that, the 2020s have been pretty rough on all of us. And very specifically, like in this province, Ontario, in this land, it's been very, very rough. And the talk that I'm doing today is really to try to understand part of my process, to try to understand what has happened in the last 5 years, the impact that it's had on me, the impact that it's had on the people we serve, the impact that it's had on us as people that serve the most marginalized people in our communities. And so, and preparing these talks, you're getting a peek inside my brain. But I've had good luck with this kind of talk before. So when I'm trying to work something out and somebody invites me to do a talk, I'm like, oh, good, I'll go workshop it with them. And so maybe this will lead to something that eventually I'll be able to put out there in another way. But I thank you for being with me today. And I really look forward to the conversation that I hope we'll have about my remarks. I also want to start by sort of stating an intention, because I do think that today I'm going to touch on things that might be difficult for people, challenging. And you're going to hear me say later on that I think one of the things that has really happened over the last 5 years is we've come into this place of silence where we don't talk about these things. So my hope is, even if you go from that talk, come out of this talk and say, oh, I don't know what that was about, that at least it's going to start some conversations, because I think that we actually desperately need to be talking to each other. And I'd really like to maybe start some of that today. So, part one, well, that happened. In some ways, I want to say, what didn't happen? Everything happened. And so, a lot of what we talk about when we're talking about the early 2020s is we're talking about COVID, of course, the pandemic, thousands of people dying, jobs lost, services shut down, health and social service workers just pushed to the edge and burnt out. And it all goes into this, in some ways, a black box, right? The COVID times. And we refer to the before times, and we were very quick to start talking about post-pandemic life and even back to normal. But what happened in that box was so much that is so hard to talk about. So this list, of course, is not a complete list. But when I think about the first 5 years, the things I talk about or think about are things like George Floyd and the anti-Asian racism that we saw during that time. I think about the discovery of mass graves at residential schools. I think about all the historical traumas that were evoked. And, there's things like, it would be hard to do a complete list, but certainly Israel, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, Sudan, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Syria, Yemen. I think about my colleagues in Hong Kong who were getting arrested for holding up blank cards. I think about the local consequences of all those things, right? Because we're in a world where all of these things are brought to us so regularly and so repeatedly and so viscerally. And of course, that had consequences for us. The other things I think about are the protests against the LGBTQ curriculum, which was part of a larger program against inclusion of sexual and gender minority people. I think about the existential threat of artificial intelligence. Aren't we all talking about it? They love to flash up those studies that say that we're all going to be replaced by the bots. I think about echo anxiety. And the first time I heard that, I thought, echo anxiety? ECHO, echo anxiety? But of course, I'm talking about climate. I'm talking about climate change and how we're raising a generation who isn't sure that there's going to be a world there left for them. And it's not that that's new, but again, in the last 5 years, so much about it. And I didn't put it on the list, but I also want to think about the opiate crisis that is just so present and so around us. And we're in a province where things are being done that are just making that worse, right? So the last 5 years have been a lot. And in some ways, I think when I think about the silence, I don't think that it's always an unwillingness to engage around these issues. I think that there's so much coming at us so often, so much of it. It's just like you can't even catch your breath and start to think about what your response would be to this. And so I've often heard this phrase, we are living in a moment of unprecedented change and uncertainty. And this word unprecedented, I heard it so many times. It was like somebody discovered that this, they said, what's the word we can use? What's a safe word that we can use about this? And so they all shared the word unprecedented. So we were hearing it so many times. And of course, the idea unprecedented suggests that this is something that's never happened before. We've never experienced it. There's no parallel. And it was used in the media. It was used in the workplace. It was used amongst ourselves. And I think the other thing about the word unprecedented is that it's also a way of people signaling we can't continue the way we have been continuing. This calls for some radical, out-of-the-box, never-been-done-before response. And so unprecedented, I also think, became permission to do things in a different way. Now, I can sort of think of some ways that was good. Like I go back to how during COVID, we had curb And people had what sort of looked like a basic income because they were so desperate to keep the economy going. And that was kind of unprecedented, but unfortunately not with us anymore. But I think there were a lot of other things too that happened that weren't so good and really directly affected the work that we do as social workers and social service workers. So the first thing is I feel like I want to reframe this idea of unprecedented. Those images, which AI provided for me, I will disclose my use of AI. These images are all from turn of the century when they were actually dealing with a lot of the same things. There was industrialization and people were concerned about what this was going to do to the planet. There was a major flu that killed many, many people. And just as it did in our time, that led to stigma and racism being directed at specific groups of people. There was technology being created that also created existential threats and environmental threats. And if we think about the time through that, I mean, we've had HIV, which is another flu that took thousands from us. We've had violence against Black and Indigenous bodies. It might not have been televised as it is now, but it was certainly happening. Even the campus protest that just so rocked us last year is not a new thing. There were campus protests for Black civil rights, for apartheid in South Africa, for Idle No More. And then war, conflict, certainly not new. And I remember somebody said to me, well, the difference is that war used to be something that soldiers went and fought on battlefields, and now it's something that affects all of us civilians. But that's not true either. That also has happened many, many times before. And the world has all kinds of sites that have been in ruins because of war. And then artificial intelligence, even that, true, we haven't had bots taking over before, but this is actually our fourth industrial revolution. The way we talk about AI is the way they used to talk about steam engines, right? It's going to take away jobs. It's going to change our landscape. And, I was at a talk where an economist was talking about with every industrial revolution, what happens is the rich get richer, income inequality rises, populism rises. An entire generation will never get the start that they need, right? Because we're seeing that in terms of entry-level positions. And there will be more work for people like us, because the other thing that comes with that is poverty and family breakdown and addiction and mental health. And this is also not unprecedented. So in saying that it's not unprecedented, I'm not saying that it's not important, that it's not distressing and devastating, and it certainly is consequential. But we've coped with these kinds of crises before, with war, with industrial revolutions, with devastating oppression. In fact, most of us are the descendants of people that have faced some form of threat to our existence at some time. Our resilience is demonstrated in the fact that we are still here. We remain, we continue, and we persist together. The real threat is when we don't focus on that existence, that persistence, and that resilience together. So, when we talk about the pandemic and all the things that happened, as I've already said, part of what was difficult was that so many things were happening at the same time. And this particular pandemic and the way that we managed it made measures necessary that pulled all of us apart. We all remember the holidays that weren't celebrated, the interaction through screens. At first, at least, we were on screen. Later, we weren't even on screen. We were forced apart. And as this quotation indicates, the pandemic was a breakdown in what was previously taken for granted, and in the situation of normalcy that had been patiently woven together in the micro interactions of everyday life. This breakdown upsets the emotional as well as social order and those of decisions and actions. And it actually got me thinking about the micro interactions. Those months and months when we didn't have the things that just kind of make you feel connected to each other, right? So we know that we didn't get to celebrate things with our families and friends, and we saw a lot less of them. We weren't going into work, things like that. But I hadn't thought before about what it means for day-to-day life when you're just like greeting somebody in a coffee shop every day, or when the way you nod at somebody across the subway aisle and stuff like that. These little micro interactions that make us feel like we are all in the city together, or all in wherever we are together, that make us feel like we're part of something larger, that make us feel a sort of trust around us. And that was torn apart as well. And so, what are the consequences of that kind of division? Well, I think that we haven't talked about the really long COVID social effects enough. In this paper that's cited here, this was a group of people that were working with a community health agency that had just been ravaged by the pandemic. And part of what they found was that in the time apart, social differences and social hierarchies were reinforced. And we saw that too. We saw how, let's talk just about even just getting a vaccine. We saw how you could tell who was sort of on the inside, but who was able to get it, and who was on the outside because they couldn't get it, right? We also saw a division in terms of who was able to continue working and who wasn't able to continue working. And then we also saw a division in terms of who had to keep working, even if it wasn't safe, and who had options to do otherwise. So those kinds of social differences and hierarchies became very visible. That's even before we talk about who died more, who became homeless, all of those things. And they suggest that actually the resentments that were usually in the background actually moved to the forefront, reinforced by daily reports that reminded us, unlike they were trying to tell us we're all in this together, we're all in the same boat, it became very clear we were not all in it together. And this led to what might have been a level of estrangement from each other that maybe was unprecedented. We became strangers to each other. We became disconnected from each other. And the thing is, we came out of that and we talked a lot about how this affected children, right? We talked about the little ones who didn't learn how to socialize. We talked about teenagers and people entering university who didn't know how to be with each other anymore, that kind of stuff. And that was definitely there. Certainly anxiety and all kinds of things amongst those children. But we didn't talk about it in terms of adults. We didn't talk about how our anxieties were also higher. We didn't talk about how we also didn't know how to be with each other. And we didn't know how to talk about what was going on. So it really also tore us apart. So then this happened. This happened. Okay? So while we were being torn apart and forgetting how to talk to each other about things were able to happen. Unprecedented things were able to happen that really affect what we do as social workers and social service workers. So on the one side there, I have the dialogue that was happening in universities. The universities, of course, became a real focal point for all of these protests and all of this angst. And I remember thinking back to when the encampments started springing up. And I remember thinking, these are young people who are filled with rage and pain, and they don't know where to put it. And now they finally have somewhere to put it. That's what drives you out to an encampment like that. And so, as I said, the universities were a focal point for this. Schools of social work, including my own, were a focal point for this. And while we were struggling over this, somebody declared that we had a crisis of politicization. And that crisis of politicization meant that anything that had to do with equity, diversity, and inclusion had to be stomped out because that had ruined everything, right? And so you see it all around you. Here in Canada, the way in which we are being asked to sort of mute our language about that, and I have personal experience of being asked to mute my language about that, and the way that we're dissembling slowly the EDI structures that were in all of these organizations, and the way that we're being asked to replace this with something called civil discourse. Does anybody have any experience with civil discourse? It sounds so nice, doesn't it? It sounds so nice. It kind of, I can almost see myself, sitting in a parlor with my Victorian gown on, having civil discourse. And the thing about the civil discourse is that, it seems to be a discourse that doesn't want to hear anything about how there is unequal power in the room or that there are histories that matter in this room. It keeps getting presented to me as we just need to listen to each other. Oh, well, thank God. If you pointed, how many problems could we have solved if we just listened to each other, if that's all it took, civil discourse? So that's what we're being left with. On the other side there, this is the list of words that got flagged south of the border. Now, when I was first asked to do this talk, I wrote down all these words because I thought, I'll talk about these words in that talk. But then I thought, I shouldn't count on it because surely by then common sense will prevail. And people will see that this is a ridiculous idea to be flagging research and all of this stuff because it has these words in it. These words that we know are so important to the work that we do. Well, I was really, really wrong about that. I just went to visit some people in the United States. Social workers, social work academics. They can't teach certain courses. Their research funding has been pulled. Organizations have been shut down. They're having all of their emails searched by the government. That's what's happening south of the border. And I don't kid myself that couldn't happen on this side of the border. So I asked myself, what happened? Because I've often said that if every social worker, and I'm going to add the social service workers, if every social worker and social service worker stood up together and said, this can't happen, we're going to stop this, we would be quite a force. It's not just numbers, it's that we're everywhere, right? Social workers pop up in all kinds of places. Social service workers are in all kinds of places. If we all had like a WhatsApp thread going and we were communicating with each other, we'd be able to do amazing things. But I don't think we could at that moment. I think we were still in this space of estrangement and disconnection from each other. And even though we got into this hurried place of, the pandemic's over, we can go back to normal, we didn't quite come back, right? Aren't a lot of us sitting in office buildings where there's hardly anybody there? Or are you even in office buildings, right? Those micro interactions that we used to have, when you were like in the microwave and you talked about what happened on, The Last of Us last night, right? Those were important too. But they don't happen anymore. We interact on screens. We come in at different times to the office. Very hard to pull together a movement that way. So I think they caught us while we were busy. But I also think there's another piece to this that I want to talk about. But, before I get to that, I see a note here that I wanted to mention, the times we're in, people will say to me, oh my God, we're in terrible times. Yes, it's true. I have an Indigenous friend who says the prophets predicted this. She said that they predicted a leader like Trump in the times that we're in. And as a good Baptist girl, I say, oh yeah, it's all in the book of Revelations. I saw it there too. I would also add The Handmaid's Tale. Read The Handmaid's Tale. It's all there too, right? We predicted this. Maybe it tells us something about human nature that that the prophets and the sci-fi writers were way ahead of us on this. But yeah, we're in dire times. So what do I think? This is what I've been musing over. I believe that we are in a period of profound grief. And I see here, I've written it out as a grief not observed to reference the work of C.S. Lewis, who wrote a book called A Grief Observed. Yeah. I know that when people talk about grief, they tend to think of Kubler-Ross first and her 5 stages: the denial, the anger, the bargaining, depression, acceptance. There's some useful work there. We know that a lot of people are pulling that apart now. But I find A Grief Observed more useful to me in understanding what's going on right now. Because in that book, C.S. Lewis talks about his experience of grief, the shock, the disbelief, the turmoil, the incredible pain and anguish, the hot, fiery distress of grief, and the questioning of everything one believed to be true about the world being a place that was good, and a place where good people had good outcomes. And also the isolation of that. The feeling that it's impossible that anyone can understand how you are being torn apart by this grief. And I would go further to say that we are in a state of complicated and disenfranchised grief. It's complicated in the sense that some of us, many of us, are grieving things that are acknowledged, but you can't get over them because it's not stopping. It's unrelenting. You can't move forward. So that complicates the grief. But I also think that we are also dealing with a type of disenfranchised grief, in the sense that a lot of us are grieving things that people don't talk about, that aren't acknowledged. And that means that we're alone in that shock and turmoil. And in a paper about grief supremacy, somebody wrote, "Rarely does research on grief examine how the state influences or creates conditions that do not allow for people to grieve in ways that are helpful to them, or the fact that some people are allowed to grieve openly while others are not. Instead, all the research studies we examined conceptualize grief as an individual's ability to cope with loss, or how an institution can support individuals in coping with that loss." And grief isn't dealt with very well in our culture, is it? I mean, if you think about how it's written into institutions, the most obvious type of grief is when you lose a loved one and they give you a certain number of days and then you're supposed to be back at it, right? And as they write about here, there's the privileging of grief that is in tidy grief responses that are time-limited, appropriate, rational, quiet, and do not impact capitalism. And further, that the urge to create normalcy to maintain an unspoken agreement of daily routines, to preserve a set of silently respected rules, which may not under any circumstances be violated, functions as a strategy of physical and mental survival. And what I'm emphasizing there is the quiet, the silence. Because one of the things that was really characteristic of the past year for me was people were talking a lot about feeling silenced, about the silence, about how we weren't talking about the important things. And I think it predated encampments showing up on our campuses. I think that we've actually been holding in a lot for quite a long time. So when I think about this grief, I reflect on the fact that we collectively have not grieved many things. It's amazing to me that we lost thousands of people in that pandemic, millions of people around the world, and yet there is no day of remembrance for that. No day of mourning when we lost so much. So in the people, we lost those that died. We think about those that died alone, those that died unnecessarily, those that died serving others. There was some celebration of people, of course, mostly healthcare workers, mostly some healthcare workers, in terms of their work. But who else died in that pandemic? What about people working in the Amazon warehouses? What about the taxi drivers? What about the domestic workers? Construction workers? So many people died, we don't talk about it. We don't remember it. We don't together reflect on that moment. I also think there was a period of time, in that period of time, we also lost a belief in some of the values that we thought were sacred. When we started finding things like those children at the residential schools, when we started watching all those tapes of people dying in police encounters, when we watched people rally against the safety and dignity of LGBT lives, and again, that could be a much longer list, I think that we saw values that we thought were sacred being lost. A belief in human rights, a belief in human dignity, etc. And then we also lost a lot of connections. The milestones and rituals that weren't celebrated were part of that. But we also lost relationships. There were a lot of people that we went into that period with that we didn't come out with, right? They retired, They moved away. They had to get out of that space. And we lost them without any kind of acknowledgement of that, any ceremony for that. I mean, I will acknowledge those online retirement parties and, oh my gosh, they were awful. They were awful. We tried. So I do want to say we tried. But we didn't really get to celebrate those people and celebrate those relationships, and we lost them. And so I believe that there's a real problem there in that we collectively have not grieved these things. And I think the signs of unresolved grief are all around us. Unresolved grief and that numbness, avoidance, meaninglessness, anger, depression, dysregulation. And as they say here, grief is metabolized in other spaces. Black Twitter is one site, protest, pain, and rage on the streets are others. Anger is a real and lasting response to loss ignored. This grief will not play by the rules of grief supremacy. It will not be quiet and nice. And that explains a lot of last year to me, that unresolved grief. And what people call a crisis of politicization, I think is a crisis of unresolved grief. And I think we did need to metabolize it, and it did come out in these other ways. And, I think about, for myself personally, when I say I'm better than last year, what it means is that last year, I, as a leader, like many leaders, received an onslaught of rage and hostility that I never thought was possible. I learned a lot about what people can think they can say to a Black woman leader. I did. And I saw a lot of other leaders going through similar things. But people were just so much pain, in so much pain, right? So you try to swallow it, you try to deal with it. But I really think that if we had been able to grieve properly, that we would have been able to manage a lot of that a lot better. In my program at the U of T, we have a course called Grief, Loss, and Unattended Sorrow. It's in the field of study that's for the Indigenous trauma and resiliency students. And you can imagine that there, what they do is they talk about intergenerational trauma and the grief that people carry and the fact that it's not unattended, and that it shows up in all these ways, right? All the ways we've seen in so many places. And of course, that's not just true for Indigenous communities. Unfortunately, there's no shortage of communities with intergenerational trauma and grief and loss and unattended sorrow. I had my own experience of that as well. For me, when I think about those first 5 years of 2020, something that really stands out to me is how it felt to watch George Floyd being killed over and over and over again on TV. And then when all of the news media outlets wanted to sort of build up that story by digging up every single piece of tape they could find of a Black person or an Indigenous person in Canada being assaulted or killed by police officers. And I remember at the time I was working at the School of Graduate Studies, and they asked me, what do you think should be our response? And I said, I can't help you with this. This image here, that's how I was feeling. I was walking, I was talking, I was going to work, I was trying to be a mother and a wife, I was trying to be a good friend, but literally inside my head, I was screaming and I couldn't stop screaming. I still remember it. When I talk about it, that feeling that just screaming over and over and over again, because I was just in so much anguish. And I think that's what we've been carrying for 5 years, that kind of anguish. And it has to be metabolized somehow. So we metabolize it against each other, maybe. We certainly don't talk to each other. And so I feel like it gave me some insight into what people were dealing with. I'm not here saying it was the same. I certainly have no mathematics that's going to tell us which tragedy and which trauma and which conflict and which set of deaths is the worst or not as bad. But I think we're all carrying things like that. Our clients are carrying things like that. And it makes it very hard for us to connect with each other. And it comes out of us in ways that aren't that helpful to us connecting with each other. And that I see as a major crisis in our field right now, not just in our field, right? And I found this, Judith Butler writes about, she has a book called, I think it's called, I remember, Loss, the Politics of Loss or something like that. She says, we're considering different kinds of losses here. The losses of genocide, the loss of humanness under slavery, the loss that is undergone with exile, the loss that is effaced through colonization, the loss of culture that is performed by the mandatory production of a colonized subject, and perhaps most difficult, the loss of loss itself. Somewhere, sometime, something was lost, but no story can be told about it. No memory can retrieve it. A full recovery is impossible. And so, I come back to the question, how are you doing? I have a colleague who says we actually need to be asking everybody, what are you grieving? I can feel myself actually getting emotional as I think about it. What are you grieving? I kind of want to take a moment to think about that. All the things we've lost in the last 5 years and how they're connected to the losses we had before that. How is that affecting the person you are today? How is that affecting the way you're able to be with the people around you? How is that part of what you're seeing in the clients that you serve? We have to find ways to metabolize the grief that we have. So, I did promise you I was going to tell you how to live through unprecedented times, right? Now that I've brought the room down so incredibly low. How do we live through uncertain times? So a few thoughts on that. So my inspiration here, the inspiration for this title was the WikiHow website. Because anything you can think of, WikiHow has covered, right? It's covered it. It's got these reassuring pastel-colored, visuals to tell you, you want to know how to prepare for economic collapse? It's there on WikiHow. How to deal with an existential crisis? How to prepare for life as an adult? And it may surprise you to know that the most popular article on WikiHow is how to kiss. And what I want to know is, who's the expert on that one? And how did we determine that that person was the expert? Very interesting. But here is my sort of WikiHow steps on how to get through what I'm going to call uncertain times, because they're not unprecedented. The first part is, don't be a superhero. Remember when they were calling us all heroes? And you're like, thanks. They were calling us all heroes. I want to admit that there was part of me that also wanted to be a hero. I actually had like a playlist I listened to on the way into work, blasting guitar, Muse, feeling like I could shoot laser beams from my hands, I wanted to be a hero, but we don't need to be heroes. And in fact, that's a bit of a trap when they start calling us heroes, right? Because it means that we're supposed to continue putting up with what we're putting up with, right? So you don't need to be a hero. And you're going to see in the, sort of what's coming up, that one of the biggest things that I came out of the pandemic with, out of those years with, is a belief that the most important work that we have now as social workers and social service workers is focusing on the health of social workers and social service workers. That time revealed to us that we have not been working in ways that supported our health, much less promoted our health, right? So you don't need to be a superhero. That is the first thing. Put away that cape. Put away that playlist. The second thing is self-care and organizational care, and I really want to emphasize organizational care here. On the self-care, people have always told us to do self-care, and I always felt like I was getting another thing on my to-do list. But it's true. We do need to take care of ourselves. And one of the things that I have found so incredibly helpful is a mindfulness practice. I've had a mindfulness practice for 30 years. And I would say to people when, in the worst of these times, I'm meditating like my life depends on it, because my life depended on it, right? So I'm actually going to give you a referral. I have an app on my phone called Balance that gives you a free trial. And when I did it, I got a free trial for a whole year, right? And it was really, really useful. So consider doing it. I know a lot of people will say to me, oh, I tried mindfulness. I can't stand still. I can't stay still like that. My mind just races. First of all, mindfulness will take you as you are. It's all good. But also, really, the point is that you need to find something that stills you. And the second point here about the third spaces is another way of thinking about stilling yourself, right? The third spaces is an idea that the first space is your home, where you're taking care of your relationships there. And your second place is your work, where you're dealing with your professional role and professional identity there. And that we all need a third place, where it is just about our own health, our own care, our own being with other people, and just taking care of ourselves. And of course, we're in a world where not everybody gets all three of those places, right? A lot of us are working at home. A lot of us maybe don't have the stability of home, thinking of our clients. But we do need something that pulls us out, that is just for nurturing ourselves. But really, for me, the most important thing is the organizational focus on our emotional regulation and safety in the work that we do. We know that we have really tough jobs. And if our organizations are not investing in our health, then they are setting us all up for failure. And so I come back to the idea that working on the health and well-being of social workers and social service workers is one of the most important things that we need to do. Of course, these are all beneficial for our clients too. The science is showing that mindfulness, people that engage in mindfulness practice, not only feel better about the work they're doing, but their clients feel better about the work they're doing, and their clients have better outcomes. I think that is a reason to think about doing something like that for yourself and also for the people you serve. Step 3, rituals and remembrance. I like that we started today with a ritual. It's something that brings us all together to have a bit of ceremony. And Dr. Michael Yellowbird has been doing work on this, and this podcast is one in which he talks about how ceremony has an effect on the brain. It's not just that when we do these rituals and these ceremonies together that we are joined to each other, but that's very important, of course. We are joined to each other. But it actually has an effect on our amygdala, on our prefrontal cortex, on our serotonin levels, on our hippocampus. It actually heals the brain. And so when I ask for a remembrance of the people that died in COVID, it's partly because I want that. But we also need rituals and remembrance for all kinds of things. So there's sort of the capital R rituals and remembrance where, we actually have like some kind of an event or something to mark something. But it also can be as simple as, how do you start your workday? What is the ritual that brings you into that work, and what is the ritual that takes you out of it? And how does it connect you to the people you work with? Because you need those people. So rituals and remembrance are very important. Now, I do want to mention that he also says dance can be a very important part of this. So if we want to kick back the tables and put on some dance music, I'm here for it. It's good for you. And then the final thing, re-engagement. And here I've listed our values as they're listed by the CASW. And I really think that our values as social workers and social service workers are part of what we need to do here too. And I'll finish by just telling you briefly, because I got a sign a while ago that said I was running out of time. A couple of weeks ago, I got together with some social workers, feminist social workers, and we spent almost 2 days talking about what we had and had not done in response to the Israel-Palestine conflict. First of all, not something I had talked about openly with anybody else. Secondly, not an easy conversation, as you can imagine. It wasn't tidy. We were at all kinds of places in terms of our feelings about what was going on there. But what we tried to mobilize in having that discussion was our social work values and our feminist values. How did that explain what we felt our responsibilities were? How did it explain what our accountabilities were? How did that direct us in terms of how we had to make amends for the past and how we had to do better moving forward. Now, I'd love to tell you that we also worked out all the problems of that conflict and it's over. Nope. But what happened was a part of me that I feel like had been clamped shut for so long began to open up just a little bit. And I think we need to have conversations like that and start opening up just a little bit. Knowing that it's not that we're going to find a consensus. It's not that the solutions are simple, but that we have values as professionals, as colleagues, that are supposed to see us through this. So my hope is that we're going to start having those kinds of conversations about these tough things. We need it for each other. We need it for the kind of work that we're doing. So I'm going to end there. I thank you very much for listening while I tried to figure this all out. And I guess welcome any questions if there is time for questions still.
So much, Charmaine. What an amazing and informative keynote. We do have some time for questions, and attendees can enter their questions through the chat feature on the right-hand side of their screen. And just a reminder that the chat feature is only available for those accessing the session on a computer or laptop and not from a phone or tablet. Just before I get into the questions, though, I can't scroll through the positive comments we're getting fast enough. They're just coming so fast and furious. And everyone is just loving what you've said. I picked out a few that I thought were really nice that I'll read out. One says, I didn't know how much I needed to hear this very message today. This is why social work is needed more than ever. Critical consciousness raising discourse. People are saying they feel seen, that this is so validating, that it was poignant and thought-provoking, outstanding. The talk is so amazing that their notes are overflowing. So just a lot of love for the keynote. So thank you.
Much appreciated.
Yes. We do have a couple questions that have come through already. The first one is, in a world of increasing polarization in the context of vast and rapid social and economic change, how do you see us coming together when social media, rising populism, and soon AI with tools such as deepfakes threaten to further entrench this? How do we engage in civil discourse on a mass scale? That's a big question.
I'm going to throw that out to the room. I don't know. You know what? Okay, so I know I was a bit dismissive of civil discourse. Here, I'm prepared to appropriate it, to co-opt it, because I think that it's been presented to us because people think it's safe. And, we prioritize safety so much. And of course, we don't want people to be harmed. I think we have to appropriate the term and we have to use it to start dialogue. But, again, if this was easy, we would have done it already, right? It's so many times along the way here, both, navigating what was going on as we were all shut down. And I mean, at the time in the role I was in, it was a lot about students that were isolated and alone and suicidal. And I mean, it was really bad. And I kept thinking, well, I'm a social worker. I have social work skills. I should be able to manage this. And then with all these other crises that have come, I've thought, this is what we do, but it's overwhelmed us. I think we have to acknowledge that it overwhelmed us. And again, I think it's because it was so many things at the same time. If it had been just one of them, maybe we could have sat down and talked through and worked through one of them, but so many things at the same time. So I think it's about appropriating that term and finding ways to start talking about this that begin with the fact that this is not about us all agreeing. And this is not about some belief that this is, I used to get so many emails that said, it's not complex. It's so easy. Actually, it's incredibly complex. It's really hard. And so I think if we can start there, that would be a great start.
Great. Thank you. We have a question from one of our council members, so I'm going to pass the microphone along to to John over here.
Oh, yeah, John, you were very fast with that hand. I saw that.
Thank you, Charmaine. I am so proud of what you're doing with the organization that gave me a professional training 50 years ago. I'm going to be a little bit of a downer, but on my way in here, I'm a dedicated CBC listener. And I was listening to a new colleague you have at the Monk School who's starting a new program about tyranny. And he was relating, without naming it, to the Trump era, to Hitler and Stalin, and talking about the frontal assault on organizations. Harvard is a good example, that have the nerve to be asking questions. And it's like your comment about government reviewing people's emails. And I think it's one of the major threats that, with all due respect, you didn't have in your list there, but we are moving very rapidly on the part of the most powerful person in the world towards an absolute tyranny. And that scares the hell out of me. So what am I grieving? It's that, because I think we've lost some of the foundation stones of democracy. I have no clue what the hell to do about it, but your exceptionally thoughtful and impactful presentation this morning has got me thinking about those things all over again. So that wasn't a question, but just something I had to get off my chest. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those kind words. I think I referenced it in The Handmaid's Tale. Isn't literally The Handmaid's Tale what it feels like is going to happen to us? Yeah. I don't know what to do either. But I do feel like the grieving is something that we need to do so that we can do whatever it is together. Because I feel like we're very separate from each other now. There's one over here.
Great, thank you. Oh, is there another question? Okay, I'm going to read one more from the chat, and then I'll go over to another council member. We had a question that came in from a university student, but I feel like it could be applicable to anyone in the working world or school or whatever. So they're looking for some suggestions. They're currently learning alongside people in social work who have differing views and maybe are more endorsing of what Trump and our southern neighbors are saying, and any suggestions for how to have a discourse with them.
I mean, this is where I come back to values, right? Like the thing is about our values and our ethics is that it's not we wish it was a recipe, right? But it's not. It's a way to try to dialogue through things and make the best choice you can. So if somebody says to me that they're a Trump supporter, I really want to understand what's under that and how that fits in with your values as you understand them as a social worker. And can we talk about what might be the competing ethical principles? What might be the larger concerns that we have as a profession? I think the mistake is to write off that person as like cuckoo bananas and decide that you're not going to keep talking to them, right? So to that student, I encourage you to keep these friends in the dialogue with you and try to understand what it's about and talk about the values that underlie the position that you have as well, right? There's part of me that just has a curiosity about what that could be. I mean, I'm always curious about what's underneath a set of beliefs like that. We need to actually understand that more because so many people voted for this man. And I can sit here and say, they must have been cuckoo bananas, but there has to be a reason. We need to understand it. There's something, there's a way in there. I'm so relieved, like when we had our election, I kind of thought anything was possible, right? I'm so relieved that we didn't go in that direction. But there were a lot of people who I think thought they had good reasons for that. So I don't know. We need to understand those people.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it along to one of our other council
These
members.
questions are very tough.
This will be easy.
Okay.
So first of all, Sharina, I want to thank you so much for your presentation and your thoughtfulness. And it actually felt more than a presentation as you, because there was such heart and vulnerability in there I connected to so many pieces and strands of what you spoke to in multiple ways. So I want to appreciate all that it took for you to put yourself out in such an authentic way. Um, I was thinking about oftentimes when I'm in organizations and working with organizations, I've been hearing more and more kind of this conversation of swinging that pendulum away from equity and EDI, and a lot of kind of discourse that neutralizes and erases inequities, with the justification being that it's divisive.
Yes.
And so the word, it's interesting in terms of how this comment of divisiveness is almost being weaponized as a reason to justify not looking at equity, not doing work in reconciliation, not acknowledging disparities, and the fact that, and I think when you opened up your comments today, which is often my starting place, is that especially within the work of social work and social service work, we serve and support the most marginalized within our communities. And the level of injustice in public sector and not-for-profit spaces to not address the very work of who we serve and the identities of who we serve is a complete injustice. But it's interesting in terms of that it's not being seen as doing the work. It's just being seen as being a divisive tool. Hence let's move into, what did you call it? Something discourse?
Yes, civil discourse.
Civil discourse. And if it really was about having conversations and discourse and holding tension, I'd be all for it.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it's about neutralizing and erasing and not acknowledging the fact that inequities are within our spaces and within our organizations and within communities. And so I just wanted your thoughts on, as you've been, like, have you also been hearing that the comments and narratives around, actually the reason why we're here in this time is because of the work of EDI, because it's divisive, is how we got here, as opposed to saying, like, unlike your speak that talked about, we have not named and grieved and acknowledged a whole layer and host of things, and this oversimplistic diagnosis of it's the fault of equity work that why we're here today. And so I wanted your thoughts on this divisive discourse that's attached to equity work.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly been in those conversations, and I think that, there's two things, there's sort of two tacks that I've taken personally. One is refusing to give up the ground, right? If you want to take EDI from me, you're going to have to come here and take it from me, right? Just refusing. And this is where, again, our professional values are so important. I say very clearly, I am a social worker. I am part of a community of professionals that our work is embedded in social justice. There is no world in which I'm going to take those words out of whatever it is that we're doing, right? So that's one thing. I think it's important to hold the ground. And in fact, part of a lot of what I've thought about with what's happening to my colleagues in the US is that it's incredibly important that the Canadian social work schools don't give up any ground, because they need people to be able to say, we're part of social work and you can see the standards of social work are this, right? And so, yes, refusing to give up the ground, make them take it from you. The other thing is finding the point of agreement, because what they're trying to sell us is an idea that civil discourse and changing, getting rid of EDI and calling it things like community and culture is going to solve everything. But how do you get community and culture, right? What is the strategy for that? Well, I always make the argument that these things that we've had in place is how you create safe, equitable communities, how you present, how you have a culture in which people can flourish and harms don't happen. So I just I keep putting it in. I do wonder if at some point we're going to have to give up the words. But like I said, they'll have to take them from me. I'm not giving them up ahead of time. And in the meantime, finding that point of connection. What is the path to what we're trying to get? I mean, have we really solved all the problems that we were trying to solve? Have we forgotten why these were important problems to solve? And I think this is going to be more successful in some institutions than others. So I can say that in the university, right? Hopefully, I'm surrounded by people who believe that there are values in a university that are consistent with wanting equity, diversity, inclusion. I don't know if that's as easy in a place like in the private sector or something like that, right? They used to make, do you remember the business case for equity, right? So it was all about, markets you were going to reach and all that kind of thing. We have to find new arguments for those places. But we can't, I just think we have to refuse to give up the ground. Because what worries me is that I see people doing it proactively. Right? They think, oh, this is coming. We better make these changes. And I think we have to refuse to make the changes, put them in the position of having to tear it out of our hands. Is that me done? Yep. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Charmaine. That was just unbelievable. And like I said, the comments just keep coming through. Just fantastic. I'm not a social worker, a social service worker myself, but it just really, really resonated with me. I thought your conversation about the term unprecedented, particularly, that always made me angry when yeah, I got suspicious. That's a great way of thinking about it. So thank you so much again. We really appreciate you coming. For all of our viewers, we're going to now break for lunch, and the educational sessions will start at 1:15 p.m., which you can access through the sessions tab. Thank you.